Hi, I'm Candice Malcom, and this is the Candice Malcom Show. We are going to talk about the Liberal leadership debate last night, break down who are the winners and who are the losers. We're going to talk about the surge that's happening in the polls with the Liberal Party. Is it a mirage? Is it media manufactured? Or is this legit? Is it the real thing? Are the Liberals actually inching ahead of the Conservatives? Really unbelievable. And we're going to talk a little bit about Trump's latest comments. I'm very pleased today to be joined for the entire show by the very astute and brilliant Knight Legg. He was a principal advisor to Premier Jason Kenney in Alberta. He served as the first CEO of Invest Alberta Corporation, and he advises governments and firms in energy finance all over the world. Really, really interesting person, and very delighted to be joined here on the Candice Malcom Show with David. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Candice. Good to be with you.
So the leadership debate happened last night. It was the last one. We had the French one happen the night before, and then last night was the English one. We did a live show last night. Let me just say it was a little underwhelming. It was a little boring. Basically, all of the candidates more or less agreed on everything. And rather than really talking about the issues that face Canadians, it seemed that they were obsessed with talking about the States, talking about Trump, talking about this existential threat that we apparently now face. And it was just sort of uninspiring, but we're going to go through it. I want to start right off the bat with Chrystia Freeland, because this is, I think, the third time that she has repeated this story. And I think this is a dubious story. She talks about how she spoke to a 4-year-old girl named Ari in Saskatchewan, and the little girl asked whether how Canada could stop the U.S. From invading. She also shared the story on X a couple of days ago, and she also said it during the French debate. As a mother of a 4-year-old child, look, I get that some little kids are precocious and they understand things far beyond their years, but I have a very hard time imagining my little 4-year-old asking such a question, unless maybe their parents have been, laying it on a little thick at home and scaring their poor children on the idea that Canada might get invaded. Anyway, here is Chrystia Freeland recounting the story last night.
A few weeks ago in Saskatoon, I met a 4-year-old girl named Ari. She asked me, "Can you stop Trump from invading Canada?" Ari is a smart girl, and she's asking the right question.
Asking the right question. I'm not really sure that this is really something that 4-year-olds should worry about. David, you had a criticism of this post on X. So what did you make of this making an appearance again in the debate last night?
Well, look, obviously I'm skeptical. I think a 4-year-old that's worried about geopolitics is a pretty unusual person. And if she's that bright, she'd be bright enough to know not to ask Chrystia Freeland for any help on the issue. I think that the biggest issue that we have in this entire set, first of all, it's just so obviously scripted. This is a classic PR campaign move. I've been involved in campaigns. They tell you to try and familiarize yourself with your audience and make your position more appealing by, putting words in the mouth of a small child or a little old lady or a guy with a hard hat, right? And so somebody says, I was in this place and I spoke to this person. What that represents is my perspective. And I think the punchline of what she's trying to say, which I find deeply cynical and actually craven, is the idea that she is a solution to a fear factor and a victim ideology that seems to have seized the Liberal Party of Canada in the absence of having any economic or security plan for the country. And what they've done is they've tried to say, look, there's this huge, scary external force called the United States of America and President Trump. We should all run around in fear, and I'm here to help save you. And, I'm tired of that. That's the climate motif, that's the COVID motif, and now it's the scary tariff motif. And the problem that I have in particular with Chrystia Freeland being the one that's purveying this bizarre story is that she is probably the single most damaging finance minister the country's ever had. She mixed financial illiteracy on things like net debt to GDP with a horrific decision to misprice our COVID debt. Over $400 billion in COVID debt was completely mispriced at, I think at the time, sort of 80 basis points, and now we're paying 5% on it. So she's had a series of cascading mistakes that have blown up the intergenerational theft of a debt that's now reached $1.3 to $1.5 trillion, depending on how you want to count it. They have no plan for removing that debt. And so that means little Ari, whether she's fake or real, is going to inherit a structural debt that is so destructive that it is now already costing more in interest payments every year than the entire amount we spend on all of our military. So if little Ari is actually worried about an invasion, she should ask Chrystia Freeland why she's destroyed the ability of Canada to actually pay its bills, keep its commitments to things like NATO. At the same time that, she's one of the architects of a whole series of hugely mistaken things that Mark Carney now wants to call investments. Like, my favorite investment has been the $50 billion that they blew on these EV battery plants that have all gone bankrupt. And they call that an investment. It's gross. When the market decides that it won't put a single cent into something like peak EV technology to compete with Chinese supply chains or massive American supply chains, it's because it's uninvestable. And this government, in its hubris and its arrogance, is taking $50 billion from Ari and all her friends and said, we're going to spend it right now to try and score some votes for something that looks like jobs that will cost about $3 million each in terms of the subsidies and blow up in 2 years. It's disgusting. So the bigger problem that I have, besides the obvious sort of craven nature of the PR-driven scripted campaigns, is that this entire coronation of Mark Carney that's taking place is taking place after 9 years that have been the most destructive in terms of more than doubling the entire national debt compared with all other governments combined, right? More debt, increasing the bureaucracy by over 70% in terms of cost, stunning. The total decline of public services by this massively obese, sclerotic bureaucracy that is basically paid voters for the NDP Liberal coalition, and the destruction of an opportunity society for our kids, including, bizarrely, as they start to run short on money, applying taxes to the worst possible places you would apply taxes if you want to create a turnaround, with like capital gains. It's just pure investment, risk investment capital, which is something Canada desperately needs. I've worked very hard on trying to get it from overseas in Alberta, and we've succeeded at that. But we started succeeding at that because we cut corporate taxes. We started to reduce red tape. We made a lot of very hard decisions, and Alberta continues to fund the rest of the country to the tune of $20 to $25 billion a year as a result of hard economic decisions we make in Alberta that they refuse to make federally and in other provinces. So, I don't want to go on, but I think that the punchline of what's happening at this debate is the debates are boring because it's a coronation, not an actual debate. There's no serious differences of political opinions between these sort of characters. The entire thing is scripted and constructed. Mark Carney is not being straightforward about things that he said very explicitly in the past, right? He's very much a central planner, leveler. He has a terrible track record politically in the UK. He sat in architecture here that didn't permit anything like the housing crisis, and he's tried to take credit for decisions that were way above his pay grade. So I find him to be brittle, constructed, heavily scripted, and someone that's unwilling to be straightforward about what we're facing. And that's a loss to Canadians. We should have had a huge debate on what happened with the debt in the last 9 years and what that means for little Ari. So I am, I'm troubled. You and I spoke earlier about the fact that when you go overseas, you see the absolute decline of Canada's reputation overseas on just about every front. I'm in the investment world, and people just don't think Canada's investable right now, period.
Well, it's one of the things.
Move Brookfield Asset Management. I mean, one of the most incredible things to me is to have a guy like Mark Carney there and not have Chrystia Freeland say, why did you advocate for the movement of Brookfield Asset Management from Toronto to New York? He's very clear why he advocated for it. It's because there's deeper pools of capital for global capital markets for a great firm like Brookfield. But the reason for that is people like Chrystia Freeland made Canada totally uninvestable. And it's the reason why multiple large companies have moved down to the United States. So we have serious issues they should be debating that they are actually accountable for having created in this country. And the public just isn't seeing any of this.
Well, that's one of the things I completely agree that watching the debate last night, I to your point about hubris, I mean, there was so much sanctimoniousness. These four Liberal candidates who believe that, they have been brought to us to save us from their own record, from the things that they have done, and just hearing them. I mean, they weren't held to answer for all the mistakes that we've made, that they've made. So many of them you just laid out quite articulately. Instead, they were given more opportunities to sort of double down on this idea that we need more government programs. We just need more spending on healthcare. It's not the structure that's the problem. It's just we need more money for daycare. We need more money. I mean, they were even talking about a universal basic income. As if, we did try a version of that during COVID with the CERB. Part of it was, like you mentioned, what led to record debt being racked up, and also the loss of productivity, because who wants to go work for a living when the government will pay you to sit at home? To me, the idea of a universal basic income is completely non-starter. It has been a disaster. And to hear them talk about it last night, it's like, they just seem so out of touch to me. David, I want to go through a few more examples of these candidates last night fear-mongering over President Trump. Here we have Mark Carney saying that President Trump wants to take our country, and that apparently Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, worships Donald Trump. Let's play that clip.
We have to recognize that the Donald Trump of today is different than the Donald Trump of several years ago. Then his objective was to take more of our market. Now he wants to take our country. Let me finish by pointing out one other thing. Who's the worst person to stand up to Donald Trump? It's Pierre Poilievre. He worships the man.
I've never seen Pierre Poilievre even say nice things about Donald Trump, so that's news to me. Next, we had Chrystia Freeland saying that America has become a predator and that the United States is now a threat. Let's play that clip.
For the first time since the Second World War, rather than guaranteeing the rules-based order, the U.S. is turning predator. And so what Canada needs to do is work closely with our democratic allies, our military allies. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners, specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons. And I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat.
So Chrystia Freeland, they're writing a whole new international diplomatic world order. And she even said that she envisions building a new world order. Let's play that clip.
I don't think any of us wants to be the leader who was asleep at the wheel and didn't get Canada defended, did not work with our democratic allies to protect our borders. They want to work with us. It's time for us to step up at home, to urgently reach out to them and build a new world order where democracy and Canadian sovereignty is protected.
Seems like a bit of a pipe dream to me. But next, we'll just play this final clip here, is that Mark Carney agreed with Freeland, which we saw a lot of last night, but added that the United States would be exiting this new world order. Let's play that clip.
I'm going to associate myself, I'm going to agree with that. The only amendment I'm going to make is, unfortunately, it won't be a world order. It will be a subset of the world order because the number of like-minded countries is much smaller with the U.S. exiting.
So it seems to me that they've just created this full distraction so that they don't have to talk about the record. They don't have to talk about the things that they as Liberals have done. I mean, two of the four people on stage were part of the Trudeau cabinet. Mark Carney was an economic advisor since 2020. These are Liberal insiders in Ottawa, distancing themselves from record and playing international relations and pretending to be, professors at a university, rather than potential leaders taking accountability for the things that they've done.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest problem that they have is that Canadians aren't hearing in any of that language. What they're hearing again is what the Liberal Party has done with something like climate. They've said there's a huge problem facing us. In this case, it's the United States. Previously, it was climate. Then it was COVID. And the way for Canada to be relevant on this issue is to adopt a bunch of very high spending, self-defeating policies by the Liberal government, right? So Canada's done nothing in the planet to reduce global emissions. They've made a series of self-destructive decisions to try and reduce domestic emissions, including domestic emissions of the one cleaner fuel that would have removed global emissions by being shipped into the Asian coal-fired grid, which is our LNG. And having denied multiple projects and infrastructure initiatives and private market investment into that, have closed Canada for business, not only in that sector, but in dozens of other sectors where the largest investment funds say, look, if you're that dumb, then we just don't have any need to try and put ourselves in a position of the guys that tried to build Trans Mountain and had it picked up by the Trudeau government. So we've had a flight of capital because there's a lack of vision. What's happening in the United States is Trump has come in and his national security advisors and others have basically said there will be a hemispheric shift going on. We're going to shift away from managing Europe and we're going to shift away from managing Asia. And we're going to focus, first of all, on deep priority on our hemisphere. They're dead serious about Greenland. I had some conversations with a couple guys in the State Department. It's one of the most fascinating conversations I've had. They've had files on Greenland for years, and they have an entire strategy around Greenland. They have to have a strategy around the Canadian Arctic. They're deeply disappointed with the total lack of seriousness by Canada in the Arctic. Russian subs and Russian ships ply Canada's territorial waters at will right now. That's totally unacceptable. Canada stands up, doesn't pay its NATO dues, but pays an equivalent amount of money on failed EV battery plants to compete with Tesla. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's totally provocative. So in a moment one thing that I find interesting about this moment where we've got this faculty club discussion amongst our 4 liberal sort of frontrunner candidates is they're trying to play this game like Canada has some sort of relevance in the observation that it's making that the United States is becoming more America first. That's a 10-cent idea. It's got nothing to do with our national politics or our failure to be relevant in the planet, which we are not at all. And that relevance has been declining steeply in the last 5 years. And one of the reasons for it is that if you look at the 3 biggest files that the Americans have open with us, right? Number 1, security. Back in May of last year, Marco Rubio, who was then Senator Marco Rubio and is now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, wrote a letter that was signed by 26 senators, bipartisan, Democrat and Republican, saying, we're actually done now on this conversation over you being deadbeat and freeloading on the American taxpayers for NATO and NORAD. It's over. There will be consequences. Right? That letter had a different tone than any other letter because they'd said, look, we keep talking, you keep saying, making commitments. That's over. And now Marco Rubio is leading the charge on what's going to happen hemispherically. Canada's a series of, and we can talk about this later, but there's sort of 8 or 9 major files open on the security issue in Canada. And we saw the first one and the most prominent one, obviously, the first file they're going to deal with was fentanyl because it's a promise that they made, particularly in the Midwest where it's been most destructive. And fentanyl is created to the trade, sort of connected to the trade crisis because it's a lot of the post-industrial areas that have become the areas where they've had the worst addictions, areas that have been hollowed out by their manufacturers have been hollowed out. The second big file aside from security is economy. And there's just a series of things that it's like we're not serious about talking about them. We have a 200% tariff, 200 to 300% tariff on our dairy products into the United States, right? So we can't continually pretend to be victims at all times without acknowledging that there's 2 sides to a trade debate and an economic debate, and we have to be serious about it. Canada actually has a $58 billion trade surplus with the United States when you remove energy from the equation. But energy is more important to the United States than any other component of what we trade with them because it's the lowest cost input into a huge supply chain in Midwest refining and advanced materials and all kinds of refined products that they then go on and sell around the world at profits. So if you just look at the bilateral relationship, you're spending a lot more on energy than you're sending back. But if you look at the net profitability of that relationship to the United States and its treasury, it's enormous. And these are great points that Premier Smith was trying to make when she was being castigated by this weird Team Canada crowd that stayed at home at the CBC studios in Ottawa over the inauguration, which I was at, and I saw her working the room with different people, and so I think that the problem that we've got is the deep lack of seriousness in the Liberal Party of Canada right now. It's deep desperation to make this an election against Donald Trump, who has there's a lot to talk about there, but he's easy to caricature. What I think we need to do as a country is forget Donald Trump for a minute and think about our own status as a nation and what we've done, to make the world a better place, a safer place, a place with lower global emissions. Nothing, right? What could we have done? We could be removing more emissions than our entire carbon footprint as a nation with LNG capacity into Asia, only 4 countries, right? We could be doing that. We could be absolutely having an impact. That would also be $1.5 trillion trade for Canada's economy. And it would make us deeply relevant to the United States on the security constraints that us being a huge supplier of energy into China and India would create, right? So we have these win-win-win opportunities as a nation, and we have no seriousness over people that are saying we want to lead the current version of the NDP Liberals and potentially the Liberal Party, one of our 2 biggest parties. And there's no serious debate happening around our economy, around our security and our deadbeat freeloading status and security with our allies, and the provocation that's creating in the Arctic that we simply don't seem to want to talk about as a nation. And the final issue that I think is the most optimistic opportunity for us in the next few months, and that I hope when Pierre's Prime Minister he'll pick up on, is the power of Canada as a dual use between security and economy. Principal relationship with the US on critical minerals, oil and gas, advanced materials, all the CFIUS related trade in technology, AI, etc. Canada we are the luckiest country on the planet, and we have the biggest opportunity on the planet to have a much deeper economic and security relationship with the United States. They have no intention of us being the 51st state, but Trump loves to troll this because he feels like there's just a complete lack of seriousness here. And unless he trolls it, we did nothing but stay at home and be worried about Trump being a bad guy for 2 months. And then in 2 phone calls in one day, gave them everything they wanted on fentanyl on the border. It's embarrassing as a country, right? And so I think the big opportunity for us is to take security seriously, have a plan for Canadians first, but also for America and NATO and NORAD, AUKUS. We need to take our economy seriously and start building things again, all the things that have been denied for 9 years, and open ourselves up to global capital to build those things. And we need to take the opportunity, these extraordinary dual use opportunities as the United States focuses on its hemisphere and replaces China as a critical minerals supply chain. Canada can make another $1 trillion off of that relationship if we get it right. This is the biggest opportunity for us as a nation to quit acting like victims and running scared and repeating this weird 51st state mantra, or this even more weird idea that we can have a trade war, right? We have no capacity for a trade war. I keep reading these bizarre economic assessments, right? Or we could have it's wild to see some, disenfranchised liberal hippies suddenly wanting to pick up guns and fight the United States. But I did a note on NATO. We're 67,000 people in our forces right now. We're 16,000 people shy. We have a DEI obsessed, weird, woke general staff that is, destroying the current military. And the U.S. have 1.3 million standing military and 700,000 reserves. We haven't done.
I'll just jump in on that because I did want to show this clip. We have a clip of Lieutenant General Lise Bourgeon last week saying that the priority of the Canadian Armed Forces is to streamline its recruitment of, number one, non-citizens, and number two, racialized Canadians, whatever that means, and number three is women. So to your point that they focus on prioritizing this woke agenda rather than the things that actually matter. Let's play that clip.
We are challenging outdated policies and practices to simplify security process for applicants with ties to other countries. Therefore, most applicants, included permanent resident, can begin basic training after receiving their reliability status clearance. Right now, 26.4% of newly enrolled Canadian Armed Forces members identify as racialized Canadians. 18% are women, and 5.2% identify as Indigenous. To succeed, we must continue to tap on all Canadians from all communities who want to serve.
And just further to that, the Government of Canada website for armed forces has a dedicated section for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here's what that looks like. So some of the resources included is resources to combat systemic racism and racial discrimination, a positive space program to foster what it calls an inclusive environment for 2 SLGBTIQI plus individuals, gender-based analysis plus integration into policies, programs, and services, and of course, a guide on inclusive language and terminology. So, David, to your point, at a time where things are getting pretty serious around the world. And this idea that, to your point, Trump is making these remarks about the 51st state, regardless of how we interpret them, we all are starting to realize that our military is the weak link here in North America, that we're not pulling our own weight. And yet here is the things that the Canadian military is focusing on. What's your comment on that?
Look, my grandfather fought in Burma in World War II. I've grown up around people that are in the military. And, it's been hijacked by this woke liberal NDP faculty club DEI philosophy that goes nowhere. It does nothing for combat readiness. No one that you saw on that platform, that dais, is a combat veteran. It's fake. And we know that it's fake. It's like wanting, if your house is on fire and you're on the third floor, you don't want the DEI person. You want the 230-pound linebacker guy who's a fireman that can haul you out and throwing you over his shoulder, right? I mean, this is, and that's not bias. That's simply saying there are certain attributes that make some people extraordinary at what they do. And that's what we want. We want an armed forces that celebrates extraordinary bravery, extraordinary physical capacity, extraordinary destructive capacity. And Canada made its name by punching way above its weight on those factors in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam War. We've always been next to our American cousins in different warfighting scenarios. And we've always had an extraordinary punch above our weight capacity, because you recruit mostly young men who are deep believers in their country and see it as a mission, because this is a job that requires you to die, right? And we forget that at our peril as a nation. Like, there's a certain category of person, like my grandfather was, that chooses to sign up and say, I know that in this job, there's a very good chance I'll die, because that's the entire intention of everybody who I'm going to fight against. They want to kill me, right? And they're going to figure out how. And so we have to put in, it's a deadly serious business. Russia laughs all the way to the bank of their shadow fleet, and they're seeing situations like this. These people are a joke. They're deeply unserious people. And Canadians that want to go and fight for their country to the point of risking their lives for it will not report to people that look like that or talk like that, right? Like, it's implausible that we have a nation that is worth fighting and dying for. We have values that we believe are worth fighting and dying for. And then we want to treat those the same way that we want to treat some sort of DEI faculty club, HR process at a university. Now, I think that what happens, my son plays for a soccer team. It's the most diverse crowd you've ever seen, right? You don't need to worry about racialized Canadians. We've got a hugely talented, our athletic community is hugely talented. The armed forces be the same way. You don't need to worry about diversity. You commit to excellence, and you create a demanding environment to create the best possible warfighters. You give them the best equipment so it's interoperable with all our NATO allies and our American allies. You expand and extend the strategic command function, and you provide a vision for what people can be and do in the world that's worth dying for and worth living for. And you will see people sign up in droves to that, because that's a vision of what you can do and be in the world. It's not this dead, sad numbers game, bean counting people's race, bean counting people's gender. It's embarrassing. And by the way, one of the things I find ironic is as soon as you say to someone on the left, so you're a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard, no, they're worried. So what I think has happened, what I think is happening with our armed forces, what I think is happening, what happened with climate, what happened with COVID, what's happening currently is they're politicizing something that should actually exist for all Canadians. And it should exist on the basis of a vision of what it can do and be in the world, and what Canada needs to do and be in the world. And if that was the debate, and if that was the presentation, if I saw somebody in our armed forces stand up and say, look, we have a vision for what Canada needs to do and be in the world, and this is that vision. We are going to secure the Arctic and make sure no Russian sub or ship ever gets through it. When it warms up enough to be the Northwest Passage, we're going to be part of the global security force that maintains international rule of law and rule of the sea. We are going to reestablish ourselves as the 5th largest Navy in the planet. We are going to become fully interoperable with all NATO forces. We're going to ship our gas to destroy Putin's control over European energy security. And to do all that, we're going to need 150,000 deadly, dangerous warfighters supported by the best equipment, with the best communications, fully interoperable with our European and our American allies. And that's what we're going to do and be in the world. And we're going to fund it with $3 trillion worth of natural gas trade into Asia. And Russia's going to take us seriously. And we want you to sign up if you want to be part of that. I think a lot of people sign up, and I think they'll sign up from every possible corner and category that these sort of sad HR people are trying to bean count. So when you've got people just voting with their feet saying, I don't share your vision, I don't want it, being told that there'll be some sort of special category that gets a special sort of, we really, really want you to join, right? It's just pathetic. That's not asking people. You don't have to ask my son's friends from every possible country in the world that are playing soccer if they want to sign up. They're lined up. They have to refuse more of these kids every year than they can get because there's a vision for what you can do and be. And that's what I think is lacking in this current liberal debate. I think it's lacking generally in the country in some ways. And it's one of the things keeping us from making honest, hard, straightforward decisions about who we are, what we want, what our intentions are, how we're going to make hard decisions to pay down the debts so our kids have opportunities, and we return to them the opportunity society that we inherited mostly from our parents. These are the things. I think of my grandfather. I inherited a secure world and a safe country because he put his life on the line and lost some of his best friends in the worst corners of the world, right? That was his challenge. Our challenge now is to get honest about what it's going to take for Canada to be relevant in the world in that same way again. And it's going to look different this time than it did that time. But, that armed forces presentation and that liberal debate both just show a poverty of ideas and a poverty of vision.
Well, all that being said, I mean, I agree with much of what you just said. It then seems remarkable to, I'm going to tie this back to recent polls. A poll came out yesterday that has the Liberal Party up ahead of the Conservative Party, 38% for the Liberals, 36% of the Conservatives. This is an Ipsos poll. Ipsos is very credible.
Yeah,
and this is the first time in 4 years that the Conservatives have not been ahead. So, against this backdrop of this woke mind virus that has just completely taken over the bureaucracy to absurd extents, right? You have an economy that's really just not working for us. And you laid it out really brilliantly. And so every time Trump says it, it angers them. And instinctively, they run to the most anti-American party around, which is the Liberal Party. And now we see in the last 6 weeks a 26-point swing, David. It's unbelievable. To me, it's terrifying that Canadians could have that short of a memory and could run back to the party that has just absolutely destroyed our country. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if this is a media manufactured thing that they're pumping up the numbers to make Mark Carney look good, to make it seem like there's a chance so that maybe we'll have an election and we'll see what happens. I don't know, but to me, it's really unbelievable. So can you help us understand what's happening here?
Yeah, look, I think that polls are snapshots in time. It's really important to remember that. Ipsos is a terrific pollster, by the way. There's polls that are sort of deeply funded by the federal government, ECOS and others, but Ipsos is hugely credible. I think that we're in an unusual situation because the Prime Minister has suspended Parliament. So there's no normal parliamentary debate. There is no regular press inquiry of Pierre Poilievre, what he thinks and how that can be distinguished. He's not on the stage with the 4 people that are reading these scripted comments. So it's been sort of a press blackout of any conservative ideas or responses to what's going on. And so in the absence of any sort of platform for conservative ideas in opposition to liberal ideas, what you've got is 3 months of no parliament, which is, I think, just extraordinary and anti-democratic. You've got the Liberal Party basically, in the public square right now. The debate is, which liberal do you like better? It's sort of like, which flavor do you like better of this, hard left philosophy? And it's candy coated, it's presented, and the airways are full of it, so you've got a full campaign going with people spending a lot. You've got the Liberal Party is also very careful about scripting anything that could cause a problem. Their Ruby Dalla had pulled second. She was ahead of Freeland, when they removed her. She was a danger to them because her messages were contrarian to the accepted script. And so I think that when we there's a big debate going on right now, which is, will Mark Carney, when he wins, call an election right away, or will he try and lead for a while before he calls an election? I think that and I thought that I chose kind of curtain number 2 when a friend was asking me about it. I said, I think he's going to lead for a while, because I think that in an election where you actually draw a contrast between him and Pierre Poilievre, I think the polls will shift heavily. So I'm one, I'm not trying to be blithe about it. I'm certainly not trying to I've been through this. I study polls a lot. I look at a lot of things. I would want to dive deep into some of the crosstabs of geographically, where is that shift taking place? And then also demographically, where is that shift taking place? My gut sense is that what you're seeing is a lot of elderly people, over 57, which is a very strong voter base, liking Mark Carney and seeing him as middle of the road, and given the options of the other 3 candidates, and that's kind of a response, and that's sort of, if you're constantly being shown 4 candidates that are all liberals and you're asked, how do you want to vote? I think it's not untenable that what's happening is that's being reflected in a poll where they say, well, what about the Conservatives? I don't know. One of the features of the poll that's very interesting to me is that the NDP has lost a lot to the Liberals in this current scenario. So I think if we go back to whether Mark Carney tries to lead or calls a vote right away, one of the questions will be, what role will Jagmeet Singh play? Because he's changed his mind multiple times on this.
Yeah, let's just show that quickly. So the Leger poll that also came out on February 23rd on Sunday, it shows that the Liberal Party are up 7 points to 40%. Sean, if we could put this on the screen, the Conservative Party is up 4 points to 38. So the Conservatives are actually up. Oh, this isn't the one. The recent Leger poll shows that the NDP are only at 11%, and that they are down 7% from previous polls. So, this would be the Liberals taking entirely from the NDP, and the Conservatives actually doing better than they had before, which is interesting. But anyway, you can carry on.
Well, yeah, look, I think we've got to read the crosstabs on these things. I remember I posted a note on Twitter when a bunch of friends of mine said, Harris is polling, and I said her polls are all wrong. The crosstabs don't help her at all, right? And so you have to know how the distribution looks. In the case of the states, you could be a Democrat, you could have 100% of California. It doesn't move the voting outcomes at all, but it massively moves the public. I just have a sense that this has been extremely well scripted from a tactical point of view by the Liberal Party to suspend democracy in Canada, make tons of promises. I don't know how they're able to do this. The Prime Minister just said they're going to give $5 billion to Ukraine and leave on the table whether we put troops. I mean, it's embarrassing because no one's taking it seriously in Europe. But the other thing is, how are these commitments being made without a parliament sitting? This is democracy, and the fact that the press is paid off and that they're actually going out. This weird reminder that came from Pascal Saint-Onge saying, we need to double what we pay the CBC. The CBC's become unwatchable, and it has almost no audience. But they're making these sort of tacit promises as they're, you've got media outlets covering the Liberal Party, and you're saying, what if we give you guys another $1 billion? Let's have that debate out loud. Right? It's incredibly corrupt. It just looks like a banana republic from the outside.
Well, and Saint-Onge is saying not just that they want to give CBC more money, but that they want to remove the decision-making away from the political realm and basically try to find a way to guarantee their funding, basically to protect them from future Conservative government that doesn't see the value and wants to defund it. We saw Justin Trudeau announce a proposed $3 billion bullet train from Quebec City to Toronto. California had a similar promise for a train half as long. They said that it was going to cost $25 billion. The tab is upwards of $150 billion today, and it's still not built. There's nothing built. And so this idea that Trudeau could build a bullet train for $3 billion is so absurd. And yet the media covered it. I want to bring it back to the media, though, because I just don't understand. From my perspective, no one's watching it and they're tuned out, specifically in the Gen Z and the millennial generation. People don't watch the legacy media. So how is it that they can have such an outsized influence still in our country, that they could cause such a drastic swing in just a few weeks?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. I think the media, people still pull their information increasingly from social media and different sources, right? But there's when you use people's tax dollars to fund an ideological position, that I saw this one CBC. I've thought about posting about this in light of what Pascal Saint-Onge said, but I remember the CBC did a very high production, sort of Willy Wonka mockery of the Freedom Convoy, and I was disgusted by it. Outside of Canada, even the president was compelled to say that what Chrystia Freeland did with the truckers was fascism, right? This is language that people in Europe found it bizarre, and it's extraordinary that a state-owned broadcaster not only doesn't say, let's have a question about civil rights and a decision that was found to be deeply unconstitutional, a total violation of the law, right? And instead, we're going to create a musical mockery of people whose intention was to confront the anti-scientific basis of a bunch of COVID mandates federally that were soon dropped because they were totally out of line with what was going on everywhere else in the world. And we're out of line with what was health best practice. And we're killing the business of these truckers. These guys were debanked. Terror laws were invoked against Canadians. We were told it was foreign interference. It was almost all Canadians backing these people. And the one sort of, news business of record that is supposed to serve Canadians is entirely not just failing to defend the idea that there's something important here that needs to be debated in terms of civil rights, dissent, these decisions and how this was handled. Beyond that, they're openly mocking it, sending this sort of wink and nod, like, aren't these people clowns? Aren't they dumb? Aren't they uneducated? Aren't they sad? It was so disgusting. It was so Pravda. And now we're dealing with a bunch of, second tier, politicians who are using old Soviet terms like misinformation and disinformation. And they're using them with a straight face against Canadians that want to have an open debate about this kind of society they want to live in and they want to inherit. So I think that there's a lot to play for right now. I think this is partly why the media is so desperate to portray Pierre as a Trump wannabe or a Trump supporter. I think it's painted the Conservative Party into a corner in terms of the kind of messaging that you have to use. On the one hand, you've got to say the people that are presenting themselves as defending Canada are actually the problem, because for 9 years they've created a weaker, less resilient economy, a joke of a military, and they've undermined Canadians. We've got the worst productivity. We've got, they want to do dollar for dollar tariffs, and it costs us $1.43 to do a dollar for dollar tariff. This is what we're up against. And how do you, it's sort of like the narrative, if it gets adopted wholesale by a media that doesn't want to be critical of the government, ends up bending people's sentiment and creating sort of, this idea of the Overton window, where, there's sort of a framing of ideas where certain ideas become acceptable only when a crisis kind of opens that window up. I don't think Canadians have yet seen how disastrous what's happened to the economy and our security has been, but I think they're starting to see it. I think people are more and more frustrated at the extremism that they see in our streets. The Bibas family in Israel, the strangulation of a little 9-month-old, barehanded by Gazan civilians, killed these kids in cold blood, returned their bodies. The Hamas used it as a parade. It was celebrated. Where were the foreign affairs people? Where is Melanie Joly now after repeating Hamas talking points about the fake bombing of a hospital? Where is Canada right now? There was several 100,000 people in Buenos Aires the same day that we had militant Islamist supporters shouting murderous slogans against Jewish people in downtown Montreal and Toronto. What has happened to Canada? It's beyond reckoning. In our press, the Fifth Estate, their job is to say, we've reached a point of moral blindness or darkness as a country that must be addressed. The sickness and depravity of the things being said on our streets by people sponsored by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which we only named a terrorist entity in June of this year, by the way. We still have 600 of those guys trolling our streets, and they're all using our asylum laws to try and stay in Canada, and they're sponsoring things like Samadoun. You know, everybody that went to that Hezbollah funeral in Lebanon, every single person that flies back in from Canada should be detained. And if they have anything related to not being a full citizen born here, deported. Go live there. Go live under Hamas and Hezbollah. But step off the streets and quit turning us into this anti-Semitic extremist culture. And our press is letting us down. Our law enforcement is letting us down. And our politicians are letting us down. And this is not conservative liberal. This is the kind of society we want to live in. Most of my Jewish friends have actually traditionally voted liberal. And we have huge debates over that, right? Because I think that's crazy. But what's happening, it doesn't have to be liberal conservative. We need a society that has a vision for what it can do and be. And you see complete hollowness and silence in a moment where Hamas has jumped the shark. Like if it was even possible to think they were more depraved than we already thought they were, right?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so sick that people traveled from Canada to go to that funeral. And part of the problem is the people I saw that were doing it were like white far left activists, not even necessarily.
Of course, but we have terror laws for this reason.
Right.
I promise you this, if there was a right-wing funeral and we had a bunch of thugs with tats flying up to that and coming back, you bet they'd be detained, right?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Weird, again, you know, this very weird progressive left instinct that wants to play softly. And again, I think we do this at our peril, but we need to get our cities and our streets back, and we need to end this this fraud that's being abetted by terror and criminal syndicates.
I couldn't agree more. Well, I just want to, we only have a minute left here, but I did want to play the latest Trump clip from President Trump. This is pretty unbelievable. So Trump, again, doubling down on this 51st statehood thing. You mentioned that you thought it was a joke. I tend to agree. So while signing executive orders in the Oval Office, President Trump was asked a question about whether maybe the path to Canada becoming American is through Western Canada, potentially Alberta. And so I wanted to specifically get your thoughts on this. This is a bit of a longer clip, but here is President Trump on Tuesday saying that a lot of people in Canada do want to join the Americans. Let's play that clip.
Last week, I spent some time with two government officials for Canada. I was asking them how realistic is it that Canada would be the 51st state. And they told me there is a path. Alberta is first, and if they sign on, Saskatchewan would follow, and then you go west to British Columbia. There is a movement in Canada to join us. I want to get your thoughts on that and how that's proceeding.
So it's true. Thank you, Brian. It's true. A lot of people in Canada are liking becoming our beautiful, cherished 51st state. They'll have to pay much lower taxes. They'll have the ultimate security. You know, they don't pay very much for security right now because they rely on us, which is really unfair to us.
So it's interesting, actually. I had Bruce Pardy, professor from Queen's University, on the show on Monday, and I think that the reporter might have been talking about our interview because that's literally what he said. He thought that Alberta would get a better deal. And I know Jordan Peterson made a comment like this in an essay in the National Post, that Canada has to offer something better for Alberta. Otherwise, Alberta might be the one to look to the United States. I just want to get your comment. I know you're in Alberta and you understand what the political culture there. You know, you would think as a conservative province that might be the case, although I speak to many people in Alberta and it doesn't really seem that way to me. What do you make of it?
No, look, I think President Trump's doing what he always does. He's trolling what he perceives to be an extremely weak federal Canadian government. He saw the weakness live in the way that they failed to respond to any of the questions. You know, let's scroll back for a second because I find this interesting because we don't seem to cover ourselves the way that we're covered overseas. I was in the States in December, then I was back during the inauguration. And in the U.S., people will play clips of people like Melanie Jolie supporting the corrupt Islamist ICC judge against Netanyahu, right? That will actually play. It'll be like, this is bizarre. Trudeau gave a speech saying Americans were sexist because they didn't elect a woman president for the second time. That was his speech in December when we were all worried here about being trolled as a 51st state. Chrystia Freeland the same month was saying maple syrup MAGA all the time, and then saying she stood up to Trump and Trump's a bully, right? This was like our self-appointed chairman of the U.S.-Canada Relations Committee. Now, I have some friends that are in the administration. They think she's a joke. She was a disaster when she did USMCA. People forget this, and again, our press doesn't talk about it. She was totally missing in action. She got shut out entirely by Bob Lighthizer after she went on stage saying that Trump was a dictator. She went on stage with about Putin and Trump with some left-wing activists. They did a bilateral deal with Mexico, and then we were invited to come back and try and seal a deal in a few weeks, only a few weeks remaining, but the bilateral deal with Mexico was concluded. She was out of the room. This is somebody that's never stood up for anything except trying to get reelected with a left-wing base. And so what the US observe is a series of passive-aggressive behaviors by people that are extremely weak, don't know their files, don't show up, can't engage. Melanie Joly was down there and she posted stuff. She met with like the 3 most radical left senators that are totally peripheral in US politics, right? What are we doing as a nation? Like, it's deeply unserious. So when a reporter prompts a guy like Trump and says, hey, sounds like you're going to put these tariffs on March 4 for Mexico and Canada. What do you think of Canada just being the 51st state? He's going to be like, you know what? I think they'd like it. And here's what I think is happening in Alberta. In Alberta, we had this debate where the reaction to the fact that we were we lacked resilience was we need to build these pipelines coast to coast again and start having alternative markets from the United States. So we have economic resilience. Right away, Quebec said, you know what, we don't have any social license for your pipelines. And what happened in Alberta that I don't think gets covered nationally is they said, you know what, Quebec has Alberta has contributed in the last 15 years about $300 billion net to the country. No one's even close. The next closest is BC at like 42. And after that, it's a little bit from Ontario, and then everybody else takes it. They just take the money, right? They say thank you. They don't say thank you. They just take the money. Quebec has taken far more money in any 1 year than it would cost to build that pipeline, but they don't think there's any social license for us to send cleaner burning liquid natural gas to our NATO allies in Europe. That's starting to become untenable. The thing that people should be debating is not the 51st state stuff that Trump is trolling. They should be debating, what is the purpose to be in a Canadian federation if one province is paying everybody's bills and it's basically sustaining soft socialism in other provinces that simply won't make the harder decisions that Alberta makes to have lower taxes, less red tape, more trade, and to build an economy that, used to be very oil and gas dependent, but is now heavily diversified out of oil and gas. It's got the highest net income, the youngest demographic, the highest educated workforce in the country, and the fastest growth in the country for 20 years running, even through recessionary periods. Like, at the end of the day, conservative politics aren't there to be sort of a blue jersey you wear. They're there to make people more prosperous, more secure, more free. And if the politics don't do that, change your politics, change the policies. And when you do that, and you do become more prosperous, and you do create higher net income, and you do support the federation, and you look at these provinces that refuse to do that, and they continue to be welfare states. Quebec is now poorer. It just crossed the line from being the 49th poorest US state to being poorer than Mississippi this year. Our great province of Quebec, I think Quebec's phenomenal, right? I love Quebec. But it has become an impoverished place because of these sad policies. I don't care what the political party is. That has to change. And living off welfare from Alberta isn't helping. So if people say, do you want to be the 51st state? I just say Canada has got to quit focusing on being trolled by the President of the United States and figure out what is our vision to be the first nation on a bunch of categories instead of last place in the OECD on our productivity, last place in the G7 in terms of our economic growth, last place from where we've ever been in terms of violent crime and sexual crimes, last place, 50,000 fentanyl deaths since 2016 because of our failed policies. We have to build our nation so that we get over the fact that the rest of the world sees us as the 51st state in military and security concerns. The rest of the world sees us as a vassal economic state that became more dependent on the United States the last 9 years. That's how the world sees us. We might not like it, and we might not like being trolled about it, and it might make us feel proud to sort of say we're not going to be that 51st state. But what not being that 51st state really means is policies that make Canadians more prosperous, more secure, and have a better opportunity society to pass to their kids. That's the hard stuff that has to happen. And I think when push comes to shove and Pierre and Mark Carney face off, against conservative policies like the ones we passed in Alberta that have made us the economic powerhouse of the country, with 90% of all private sector hires in the last 12 months in the nation, and the failed policies of repeating what's been going on in the Liberal Party, we're going to win. And that's going to be good. And that's the best response to the 51st state, BS from the president.
All right, David. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for your insights. Really enjoyed talking to you today. That's David Knight Legg. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Candice. Great to talk to you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with all the news. I'm Candice Malcom. This is the Candice Malcom Show. Thank you, and God bless.